Hello, very good evening. Welcome to this webinar on what kind of a leader are you? This webinar will be delivered by Ben Stanbury. Before we start, I'd like to take you through a few housekeeping points. The slides of this webinar and the recording will be emailed to you within 1 week after the webinar. There will be a post-webinar survey that will pop up at the end. Please do take the time to complete it for us. You may have some questions that may occur to you as you go along the webinar. Please feel free to type them in the chat box, and we will allocate time at the end for the speaker to address your questions. I'm passing it over to Ben Stanbury now. Enjoy the webinar.
Well, good afternoon or good evening to you wherever you are listening from. My name is Benedict Stanbury, and I'm sitting here in Dubai and talking to you wherever you are in the region. And we're going to be talking this afternoon about leadership, and in particular about your personal leadership style. Just to tell you a little bit about myself. He says, as he, well, there we go. Quickly tries to change his slides and fails.
Which one do you want to press?
There we go, the wonder of technology. I know what to do now. So I started my life as a lawyer before moving into management consultancy. I've had roles as the chief exec of an NGO in Brussels, as well as then being an elected politician in London. Most recently, I've been the director of a private healthcare company, but now I'm an academic and a consultant specializing in management and the principal of IHLM, which is a management school in Oxford in the UK. Should you have any questions that arise as a result of this webinar afterwards, then feel free to contact me or to link with me via LinkedIn. Well, what are we going to talk about this afternoon? We're going to go through 4 major learning objectives today. First of all, we're going to talk about why leadership matters and why, therefore, it's essential for leaders and managers like you to be continuously developing and honing your leadership skills. Then we're going to talk about the 6 leadership styles identified by an author and psychologist called Daniel Goleman. Now, you might have heard of him. He's famous for his work on emotional intelligence, but he's also done a great deal of work on leadership styles, and particularly on which leadership styles lead to high performance for organizations. So we're going to look at a little bit of his work and then finally talk about how you can develop a more effective personal leadership style. So, are you ready? Well, if you were here with me right now, maybe I'd take you into Dubai Mall. And right up on the top floor, on the 3rd floor, is a very large bookstore. Actually, probably the biggest bookstore I've ever been in. And the business and management section is where I tend to spend my money. So you can see in this photograph here, just a part of that enormous section. Now, let's imagine that you're searching for a book on leadership. You want to improve your own leadership skills. So you go and you find the leadership section, which is actually towards the back of this particular part of the bookstore. You're going to find hundreds, no, maybe thousands of books about leadership. Which one do you choose? There seems to be as many books on leadership as there are people who are interested in the subject. So it's very difficult to know where to begin. And there are a lot of different theories about leadership. But I think that we need to be quite practical about leadership. After all, it's one thing to learn about what styles of leadership there are. But perhaps what's more important is to know which are the styles that lead to success, that lead to high performance. So the books I'm always interested in are the ones that have done research, that have looked at what is it that leaders do in the most successful organizations, whether they be public or private or not-for-profit, when you look at these great organizations, what is it that the leaders do? But there's another question which I think is also interesting. Are there things which make leadership skills specific to the situation you're in? Meaning that the leadership skills that work in one organization or one situation are not necessarily the skills that will work in others. So in other words, is there some kind of moderating or mediating variable that's affecting the strength of this relationship between leadership or performance? Now, my particular area that I work in a great deal is healthcare. And healthcare, as you can imagine, is an area where you've got lots of quite senior physicians and surgeons in charge of big healthcare teams. And one of the things that's often important when you're in an organization and want to understand how the leaders are working is to understand how everybody else feels. Are they scared of their leaders? Do they enjoy coming to work? Are they happy? Or do they dread working with people? Would they tell you if you'd made a mistake, or would they be scared to do so? So some of these questions tell us about the kind of climate that leaders create. And the research tells us that climate is probably an important mediating variable. In other words, leaders don't create performance directly. They create performance because of the climate or the culture that they create within the organization. Great leaders create great climates where people enjoy their work and therefore deliver higher performance. What makes a great climate? Well, Daniel Goleman, whose work we're going to talk about a little bit later, he says that great climates consist of 6 things. First of all, flexibility. In other words, that the people working in a great climate, they're ready to take on different responsibilities. The second is responsibility itself. People are accountable. They are happy to be held responsible and accountable for the results that they achieve. The third element is standards. There are standards for behavior. There are things that people know you can do, but also things people know you can't do. And there are rewards. People are recognized when they do good things, when they work hard, when they achieve good stuff. There's clarity about people's roles, about what they have to do, about how they're contributing to success. And there is commitment. Commitment to the organization, commitment to the department or team where the person is working. There's a loyalty and engagement with the job. So if Goldman's research is true, then this means that great leaders create great performance because of the climate that they create in their organization. And that's actually also true when you look at specialized research in particular types of workplace. Healthcare is one of my interests. In some research by Shipton and colleagues in 2008, he found that great leadership delivers high quality care, a focus on the needs of patients, a focus on achieving high standards. It leads to trust between patients and their doctors and to openness as well. And these are the ways in which the performance of the hospital is delivered. So if we actually take a look then at some of the relationships, well, these relationships you can see in the graphs here, they might not be easy to see, but take a look at the scattergram in the box on the lower right-hand side, the one that says leadership effectiveness against care quality climate, graph D. Now, you might not believe it, but this is a really, really exciting scattergram as far as researchers are concerned, because what it shows is that there's a very strong relationship. Generally speaking, leadership effectiveness increases in line with the quality of the caring climate at the hospital. So what that probably means is that great leaders, the better they are, the better the climate they create. Likewise, if you look at graph C on the lower left-hand side, you can see that there is a negative correlation between complaints and leadership effectiveness. In other words, the more effective leaders are, the fewer complaints there are from customers or from patients. So that's all very good news, and it tends to mean that good leaders can definitely have an impact on the performance of their organization. We can see here that the better the leadership, the fewer the complaints. So, time for a quiz. I'm going to ask you 6 questions, and I want you, on a scrap of paper, against each of these questions, to give yourself a score. Now, you can give yourself a high score if you really strongly agree with the statement we're going to make. A 9, maybe an 8. If you agree, a 7 or a 6. But if you're neutral, in other words, if you're right in the middle, you neither agree nor disagree, give yourself a 5. And then the more strongly you disagree, then the lower the number you're going to give. So here we go. Are you ready? First question, or first statement. I think the key to success is through meeting the needs of my team members. Do you agree or disagree? Give yourself a score. Have you done that? Okay. Next question. I provide a clear idea of long-term direction. Does that describe you? Is that something you try to do? Again, give yourself a score. Okay, question 3, or statement 3, I should say. I help people to identify their strengths and weaknesses. What's your score? Okay, question 4 now. I expect people to do what I say. Is that you? Number 5. I include everyone in decision making. Do you agree or disagree? How much like you does that sound? Okay. Final question now. I insist on excellence. How much does that sound like you? So hopefully you've had 6 statements here and you've put a score next to each statement. Now, put that somewhere safe, because we're going to come back to that shortly and discover what it means. Now, if we go back through the long line of literature about leadership, I like to think that there's 2 different kinds of literature, 2 kinds of books. The first kind, which I've put above this red timeline, are the kind of the academic books, the stuff by professors and lecturers. The stuff that's below the line is what I call the business bestsellers, books you've probably heard of that are about leadership. Now, I'll come to the business bestsellers in just a second, but if I go above the line, the story of modern leadership could be said to start with a Harvard professor of psychology called David McClelland. And in the early 1970s, he and his team are looking into what makes great leaders. And David McClelland approaches a very, very large US government department, the diplomatic service, I believe. Now, they're famous for recruiting only the smartest, brightest graduates from Ivy League universities. And he said to them, he said, how do you recruit people? Oh, well, that's easy, they replied. We set an IQ test. We want the cleverest graduates possible. Okay. So I wonder, said David McClelland, is intelligence what makes you successful in this organization? If we looked at the high flyers, the most successful diplomats, would they be the most intelligent people? Well, at this point, of course, the HR department had to admit, well, they didn't really know, since they had never tried to compare the scores that different managers had had years ago when they'd done their entrance examinations for the diplomatic service and how they were doing today in their careers. So instead, David McClelland did it for them. What do you think he found? Do you think he found that it was the most intelligent, the most academically intelligent leaders that had gone all the way to the top of the service? Or was there something else that might explain high performance? Well, what he eventually found was that there was only a very small correlation between intelligence and success. So that means, like all good research, that there was a new question that needed answering. If intelligence isn't what gets you ahead as a manager, what is it? So a colleague of his named Richard Boyatzis did a very large survey indeed. He interviewed over 2,000 managers in about 40 organizations and identified 19 what he called competencies. Now, he defined a competency as an underlying characteristic of a person which results in effective or superior performance. So what he said is, if you look at people's skill, their knowledge, what we might call IQ, well, that's kind of like the bit of an iceberg which is above the water. We see it, it's visible, and we think that that describes the whole thing, but it doesn't. Because he said 80% of performance is kind of invisible, and it's all down to your characteristics, the things that motivate you, your social role, the way you see yourself, your personality, and your motives. So what Richard Boyatzis found was that therefore success in a leadership role is not about intelligence, it's about what you do. So what do leaders do? Well, he identified 19 competencies, and he divided those between what he called the threshold competencies, the things that people need to do as a basic, as a given, before they can be trusted with managerial tasks. And on the other hand, the competencies that he thought led to high performance. But I'm not going to dwell on his results because we've still got a few other things to look at. So you may have heard of an American called Stephen R. Covey, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago. He wrote the best-selling 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Now, you might not think of that book as a management or leadership book, but it very much is. Now, Stephen Covey identified 7 habits for which we could read 7 competencies, 7 characteristics, all of which lead to high performance, to success. What were they? Well, he said, great people, successful people are proactive, they get on with things, they begin with the end in mind, so they always have in the front of their mind an idea of what they want to achieve. And they also prioritize effectively, they put first things first. He also said that these are people that when they're getting together with others, they always try to think win-win. They don't compete with people unnecessarily. They look for ways in which they can get what they want and other people can get what they want too. Also, they can empathize with people. They seek first to understand, then to be understood. And they synergize. They try to look for opportunities to cooperate with others. Finally, effective people sharpen the saw. What does that mean? Well, a saw is a tool, isn't it? It's a tool used for cutting maybe a tree. But it won't work if it's not sharp. So the saw is Stephen Covey's metaphor for your personal and professional skill and knowledge. And what he's saying here is that successful people are constantly learning and developing new skills, new knowledge, new competencies. They're constantly sharpening their saw. Now, from time to time, we see successful people from business talking about their lessons that they've learned. So one such person is Jack Welch, and in his book published in 2001 called Straight from the Gut, Jack, who was the CEO of GE, a very, very large multinational that makes everything from CT scanners to aircraft engines and light bulbs, he described the characteristics of what he called A players, or in other words, the best people in organizations. He said they're filled with passion, they're committed to making things happen, they're open to ideas from anywhere. They have lots of runway ahead of them, meaning they've got lots of ideas for the future. They have charisma, They can make business productive. They have high energy levels, and they can transmit that, share that with other people around them and energize them too. They have the edge to make difficult decisions and the ability to execute or to deliver on their promises. You can see here that Jack Welch seems to like words beginning with E. So he says, look at these. These are all the competencies, the characteristics of great leaders. So it seems that everybody's in on the leadership game, but are they always describing different things or the same things? Well, before we move on, I want to get you to do a little bit more thinking for yourself. Have you ever suffered an amygdala hijack? It's not as scary as it sounds. The amygdala is a tiny little organ that's part of the center of everybody's brain. So we all have one. You have one, I have one. Now, in his book, Emotional Intelligence, Daniel Goleman describes what the amygdala does. It's very much responsible for your gut reaction, your strong, sudden reactions. If you laugh at someone's joke, if you shed tears in the sad part of a movie, if you smile when you look at a little boy or a little girl smiling at you, then you probably don't really control these reactions. These are emotional responses. They're immediate. They're overwhelming. Sometimes they can even be out of measure with the actual situation that you're reacting to. So let me ask you a question. And of course, the great thing is that as you listen to this webinar, you know that you don't have to necessarily reveal the answers, but can you remember a time when you had a sudden and strong emotional reaction to a situation or something someone did or said or wrote? What did you do? How did you react? And was it appropriate or not? Or do you wish you'd behaved differently? I can definitely think of one, which is getting emails sometimes from people and being angry or upset or frustrated by what's being communicated. It's very tempting, isn't it, to then immediately reply and hit the reply all button and land up actually with everybody seeing what you wrote. And you might react angrily or you might be rude, and then later on you regret it because you think, oh, I shouldn't have sent that email. I should have just written it, saved it, and waited. Maybe sent something the next day when I'd calmed down a bit. Now that's an example of an amygdala hijack. And in his work on emotional intelligence, Daniel Goldman talks a lot about the importance of being able to understand our emotions. Now traditionalists might say, oh, what have emotions got to do with anything? They're a distraction. They cloud our judgment. We have to be very controlled, maybe almost robotic when we're managing our organizations. But high performers say no, they say the opposite. They say emotions are really important because they're what motivates us. They're what increases our confidence. They build trust between people. They help us get feedback. So yes, we've got to manage our emotions, but we've got to use them too. Hence, Daniel Goleman created this idea of EQ, Emotional Quotient, using tests to measure activity between the amygdala, which is your fight or flight, your involuntary response, and then the part of your brain, the cerebral cortex, which does all of the logical, rational processing. And he found that people who have a high emotional quotient, what he calls EQ, who are really, really very good at managing and using emotion, well, he said he thinks this is what explains what makes people more effective leaders. So while IQ might help you get a job, it might measure whether you're able to learn or understand something, whether you can convince something of somebody, EQ is all about being able to understand and use emotions and logical skills. A couple of years ago, I was delivering an in-house course for a client in Candor. And I was doing it in conjunction with another trainer, a colleague of mine. Now, she has a very different style to mine. And at the end of the course, a couple of delegates came up to us and said, "Thank you so much, we really enjoyed the course. You know, Mr. Ben, you are the head, and Mrs. Jill, She's the heart. Now, I'm not sure whether that was intended as a compliment, but I thought that was a very nice way to say that perhaps the delegates on this course had perceived that I was very smart. I talked about facts and figures and was quite academic in my approach. While my colleague, Jill, she was more emotional. She managed to connect on an emotional level with the people in the room a little bit better than I did. Does that mean that perhaps she has a better EQ? It might do. Does that mean that she was a better trainer? Well, it might mean that as well. So what makes you emotionally intelligent? Well, Daniel Goleman says that there's 4 key features. The first is self-awareness, the ability to read your own emotions and recognize their impact, while also using your kind of gut feelings to guide your decisions. So if you've got good self-awareness, you know, for instance, that I feel angry, I feel upset right now. I should probably not react. I should try and just wait until I feel calmer. Self-management is also part of that, the ability to control your emotions and your impulses. Have you ever met people that seem to get angry really easily and quickly? Perhaps they lack self-management. Then we've got social awareness. That's the ability to sense, understand and react to others' emotions, while also understanding the social networks that you're working in. So if you can tell that someone else, even though they seem to be hiding it, is depressed or down, or if you can tell someone else is excited or happy about something, that's the beginnings of social awareness. Finally then, all of these skills enable us to improve in the way we manage our relationships, the way we inspire and influence and develop others, but also the way we manage conflict or avoid conflict. So each of these levels of skill has its different components. Self-awareness means being emotionally self-aware, being able to realistically evaluate your own strengths and weaknesses, but also having a strong and positive sense of your own self-worth. And now that doesn't mean being egotistical, but it means liking yourself and knowing what you're good at, but what you're not good at. Self-management, on the other hand, is about self-control, but also about being trustworthy, being conscientious, doing what you say you're going to do, being adaptable, achieving things, and taking the initiative. Social awareness is all about empathy, understanding others, being aware, and also having a service orientation as well, being able to recognize and meet customer needs. And then finally, relationship management is all about being a visionary leader, being able to inspire and influence others, developing them, coaching them, communicating effectively, helping bring about change, solving conflicts, de-escalating things when they get heated, building bonds with people, teamwork and collaboration. So if you're really great at managing relationships, it may well be that you're very good at developing teams. So all of these build together. Self-awareness helps me to be more socially aware. Self-management also helps towards managing relations with others. So all of these things contribute to being able to have a positive impact on other people. And what benefits does this bring in the workplace? Well, in one particular survey in a hospital, Farizelli and colleagues found that 50% of work satisfaction is determined by the relationship an employee has with his or her boss. That comes down to emotional intelligence. A large hospital managed to reduce the turnover of critical care nurses from 65% to 15% within a year and a half of instituting an emotional intelligence screening assessment, essentially recruiting nurses on the basis of their emotional intelligence. Now, Farizelli felt that in a healthcare environment, emotional intelligence predicts high performance, maybe because it helps us to cope with stress. It mitigates the effects of stress. So what they saw was the higher someone's EQ, their emotional intelligence, the higher their performance in the workplace. So if that's really true, then surely emotional intelligence is something that we might all want to improve. Now, when you registered for this webinar, you may have noticed on the Informal website that there's a questionnaire that you can download. Now, that questionnaire is an in-depth questionnaire designed to enable you to assess in detail your preferred leadership style. So you may have downloaded it and already completed it, or maybe you haven't, and you'll get a chance to do that after the webinar. Now, that questionnaire is exactly the same as the questions that I just asked you about your leadership style, but it asks you in a bit more depth. Because Daniel Goleman has taken his work on emotional intelligence and he's refined it in order to identify 6 different leadership styles. And those styles are visionary, affiliative, democratic, coaching, commanding, and pace setting. Now, are all of these good styles? Well, the answer is it depends. So let's take 5 minutes to look at what each of these styles actually means. Now, if you were to go back now and look at the questions that I first asked you, look at question number 1. Now, at this point, I'm wondering whether or not I can go backwards through my slides. I can. Let's have a look. No. Okay, I'm gonna stay exactly where I am. But if you go back and look at question number 1, we can do it. There we go. My arrows on my keyboard were not working for a second. If you go back and look at question number 1, or statement number 1, you'll see it said, I think the key to success is through meeting the needs of my team members. So how did you score? Well, if you scored highly on this particular statement, then that means that you are an affiliative leader. And affiliative is one of your preferred leadership styles. So what does the affiliative leader actually do? Well, the affiliative leader puts everybody else first. They like to create harmony. They want to create good feelings among the team, avoid conflict, and build emotional bonds. So the underlying emotional intelligence competencies that they use to do that are empathy, building relationships, and good communication skills. So if you're an affiliative leader, then you're the kind of person who brings in a cake when there's something to celebrate or someone's having a birthday. You organize social events, maybe, for your team. You try to create great relationships. Now, this style can work really well. In fact, its overall impact on organizations is positive. It works best when maybe there has been some arguing in the team and it's time to heal the rifts, or perhaps to motivate people during stressful situations. There are, however, times when it doesn't work. So maybe when staff performance is not adequate in a crisis or a complex situation, or with staff who are very task-orientated and they don't really want to get too touchy-feely in the workplace. They want to just be allowed to get on with things. So that's the affiliative style. Now, take a look now at question number 2. Again, what did you score? Well, if you got a high score, that might indicate that you are a visionary leader. And visionary leadership is the most powerful kind of leadership of all. Visionary leaders say to everybody, come with me. And they paint a picture of what their ambitions are or what the team's ambitions should be. And they get everybody behind an idea or a vision or an objective. So they are self-confident, but they have empathy. Maybe above all, they want to be a catalyst for change. That means somebody who helps to bring about change. Now, this kind of leadership style works when changes require a new vision or when a clear direction is needed. The style doesn't really work, however, if you are not yourself seen as credible and good at your work, or if you're not prepared to help to develop staff and communicate with them. Now, our third leadership style is coaching. So take a look at your score for the third question. Again, how did you do? Did you get a high score? The higher your score, the more likely you are to be a coaching leader. Coaching leaders coach people. They develop people for the future. They give them tips and suggestions, what they should try, what they should attempt. They develop others. They have empathy. They have self-awareness. And this style is a great style for developing other people, for helping to improve performance and therefore deliver people's long-term strengths. But it doesn't really work if you yourself lack expertise or if your staff require really close supervision because they don't really know what they're doing. It's also not great in a crisis when you don't really have time to be coaching people. They've got to get on and do what they have to do. But overall, it has a positive effect on organizations. Now, the next question. Question, I think, number 5. What's your style? Is it commanding? Do you tell people, do this, do that? Do you demand that people do what you ask them immediately? Well, if so, you might be a commanding leader. Now, there are some situations in which a commanding style is helpful in a crisis or to kickstart a turnaround with problem employees or for straightforward tasks. But the style does not work when it's applied to employees who are already perfectly well motivated or when it's applied to complex tasks. So overall, the commanding style, the kind of sergeant major military style of leadership, actually has a negative impact on organizations. Now, here's number 5. How did you score on this one? This is the democratic style. Now, if you like to get staff involved, then this is being democratic. It's building commitment through consensus, through agreement, asking people, what do you think? Now, the emotional intelligence competencies involved here are collaboration, team leadership, and communication. And the style is a really great style when you've got great, motivated, skilled, and competent staff. And they need to be coordinated, and the best approach isn't necessarily clear. So it's only right that you ask people for their thoughts and ideas. But the style doesn't really work if there's no times for meeting or discussion, in a crisis when you need to act quickly, or when staff themselves are not really competent. But the overall impact on organizations of a democratic style is, once again, positive. Now, finally, statement number 6. How did you do? Now, this is a very interesting style. We call this the pace-setting style. If this is your style, then you probably set really high standards. You expect people to achieve those standards, and you're upset if they don't. You're a role model. You say to people, do as I'm doing. Do it now this way. Do it now. Do it to the best standard you possibly can. Now, all of this is driven by conscientiousness, the drive to achieve. And it's a great style when you already have a highly motivated, skilled and competent team who know what they're doing. But it doesn't really work when staff need closer direction, or they need to be developed or coordinated. And unfortunately, this is one of 2 styles, the other being the commanding style, whose overall impact on the climate of organizations is actually negative. In other words, it leads to worse performance, not better performance. Now, that's not to say that there isn't a time and a place for pace setting as there is for commanding styles. There isn't really any right or wrong leadership style, and the most effective style will depend upon the kind of team you're working with and their experience, on employees' strengths and weaknesses, on the complexity of the task, the time pressures you're under, on the risks associated with deviating from performance. The higher the risks, the more you need to make sure people do exactly as they're told. And it will also depend on the resources available, how much time you have, how many people are available, and so on. But what's critical to your effectiveness as a leader is whether or not you can diagnose the demands of the situation you're in and then use the right styles. Now, Daniel Goleman in his research looked at the connections between these leadership styles, the impact they have on the climate of the organizations that managers are working in, and then ultimately the financial results of those organizations. And here's what he found. Now, these figures might not make much sense on their own, but basically a positive figure shows that there is a correlation, a connection between the leadership style and delivering a better climate, the kind of climate that leads to higher performance. A negative number, which is a number in brackets, that indicates a negative correlation. So in other words, that the style of leadership leads to less flexibility, less responsibility, and so on. Now, what you can clearly see there is that visionary leadership has the highest overall impact on climate, 0.54, followed by the affiliative, the democratic, and the coaching styles. The styles that have a negative impact on climate are the commanding and the pace-setting styles. The democratic styles are good style. The commanding and the pace-setting styles. They should only be used sparingly in certain exceptional situations. But the other styles, they're good styles. So, finally, just for the final 5 minutes of this webinar, I'd like to talk then about how you could develop your styles. So let's say that you think that you could be more affiliative, since that's a positive style. How could you do that? Well, here's some tips. First of all, you need to resolve any interpersonal conflict. You can't become an affiliative leader if certain people are avoiding you, don't like working with you, or just don't like you. You need to try to become friendly with people and avoid conflicts and arguments. Now, that's not easy. That might not be the kind of person you are. You need to be able to sympathize with other people and show more empathy. I'm constantly having these arguments with my wife. I offer practical solutions whenever she has a problem or complains about something. And she looks at me and says, I don't need help. I just need your understanding. So empathy, the ability to sympathize, can be really important. And we fellows, we probably need to do it more. We also need to accommodate personal needs. If people need a day off because of a family problem or have certain issues that they need to be able to deal with, then we need to recognize that people are human beings. They have personal needs, and we need to try to help them with those. We need to trust people, treat people with respect and dignity, trust them to perform. We need to be prepared to initiate personal contact with people, go and introduce ourselves to people, make friends. We might want to provide more social activities, more opportunities for people to get to know each other, and for sure, to reward people, not necessarily with money or other things of value, but with recognition, with saying, well done, and with saying, thank you. These are ways we can develop our affiliative style. Now, on the other hand, maybe you want to be more visionary. You've got to come up with some ideas and get people behind them. So, first of all, that means that if you want to be more visionary, well, guess what? You need a vision. You need an idea. You need an objective or an aim that you can then describe to people with your vision speech. Can you tell somebody else what you want to achieve in a way that's interesting for them, that they find engaging? And can you do it in an elevator speech? In other words, very, very short, 30-second speech that you could literally give during the time it takes an elevator to move between two floors. Are you getting other people's ideas? If you're going to develop a visionary style, that doesn't just mean telling people what to do, but listening to their thoughts. Can you explain why your idea is a good idea or why things need to be done? Workplaces are full of people who are told what to do things and how to do them, but aren't really sure why. Can you delegate responsibility? Let other people do things for themselves? Can you give people good feedback? Can you reward and punish people fairly when they achieve what you want them to, or when they don't achieve it despite help? Now, the coaching style is also very useful. Coaching is about creating development goals with other team members, identifying their strengths and weaknesses, and as far as the weaknesses are concerned, picking one or two things to help people to improve, and supporting them in that as well, helping them find the resources that they need, courses, training, or so on. It's also about seeking opportunities for team members and encouraging improvement. Now, maybe you actually do need to develop a more commanding style, not because it's the most effective leadership style, but because sometimes you've got to get people to do things the proper way. Now that means you yourself must know the work well. You must be an expert on what's going on. You must give direct orders and be decisive. You must be very clear about the performance standards that have to be achieved. You need to be able to monitor people closely and point out when they have deviated or moved away from the rules that you wanted them to follow. Now, to be more democratic, well, you can start by holding more meetings, not for the sake of having a meeting, but for the sake of making sure that as many people as possible are able to participate in problem solving and decision making in your unit or department. You need to be able to share decision making with other people. Look for consensus, look for agreement with other people about the major decisions, and recognize and reward good performance. Finally then, the pace setting style. Sometimes you might need to become more pace setting, especially if you want people to achieve better standards. So, to do that, you must maintain your own expertise, your own professional knowledge and skills, so that you can teach by example. You should be insisting on excellence. You should have very high standards. If a task is low risk and won't really cause many problems if it goes wrong, well, you can delegate that. So don't be afraid to delegate and emphasize results. Be very clear about the standards that have to be achieved and emphasize just how important it is that those standards are met. So these are a few tips for developing your leadership style. And what you might want to do as a follow-up to this webinar is do the questionnaire that's on the Informal website, and then reflect for a moment on just a few of these final questions. First of all, should a leader, whether you're in healthcare or in any other area, select roles based only upon their preferred leadership style? Or should they instead be flexible enough to adapt their style to the demands of a given situation? So in other words, should you look for situations where your strengths are going to help you? Or should you be adapting and expanding and updating your leadership style to fit with the situation you're in? Also, what could you do to analyze a situation and choose the right leadership style for that situation? What could be an early warning sign that you've adopted the wrong leadership style? And also, what should you do if you find yourself in that situation? Should you change your style, even at the risk of appearing to be inconsistent? Well, there we go. That's my webinar for you today. I hope you've found that interesting. And now, if you've got any questions, now's the time we can go through them. And we have a comment here already. Al-Jahara Al-Mogdbel says some leadership styles can be used with some employees, but not with others. It should depend on the team, competencies, and commitment. Sometimes it must be coaching, while others must be affiliative leaders. I think that's absolutely right. You have to look at the people you're working with. So I remember a situation where I was working with a leader, a female leader, very soft, very caring about her team members. But the organization got itself into a situation where it was performing quite badly. It was losing money, it was losing clients. One of the reasons for that was team members didn't really have a sense of urgency about the situation. So in that situation, perhaps it was necessary to be a little bit tougher and to focus on making sure the team understood the standards that were expected. But I think those kind of situations are rarer. And as Al-Shahara has pointed out, perhaps we've got to look at the team and what they need, and look at their needs, and adapt ourselves to meet their needs. So I think that's a very, very important comment, and you're absolutely right with what you're saying right there. What other questions might we have? Well, I've got a question here now. If you've got a certain style and you're going to find it very difficult to change that style, for instance, you're quite a soft person, you don't like having arguments, yet there's a difficult situation that you've got to deal with, how should you approach that? Should you try and become tougher, or should you recruit somebody else in the organization who's known for being a little bit tougher, a little bit more no-nonsense? And in that situation, how can you do it? Well, certainly you could work with others in a form of collective leadership, but I think that the importance of Goleman's leadership styles is that actually you should be looking at ways you can develop yourself. A really effective leader shouldn't necessarily be relying upon others to do the things that they can't do. They should be adapting themselves to their situation. So that might mean that now and again you've got to do something unpleasant. Now, I know lots of leaders who really don't want to have to hold people to account, much less punish them or threaten them. But sometimes you have to be very clear with people about the importance of a particular goal or objective and what would happen with the organization if that goal is not actually achieved. So sometimes you have to kind of be tough in order to actually achieve the right outcome. And that's when just occasionally that commanding or pace setting style comes in. So I think that that's just about brings us to the end of our time today. Thank you for your questions. I hope that's been a very useful session for you. And we have yet another question coming up, so we'll just take that as a last minute question. How to deal with employees who take the toughness, I think that is, personally. Well, again, that's very challenging because some employees might perform poorly, and despite your best attempts to coach them, to try to improve their performance and improve their skills, or despite your best attempts to encourage them and engage and motivate them, you're just not getting through. And again, this now is a question that takes us, if you like, a little bit beyond emotional intelligence and leadership styles, into the question of what kind of culture you want your organization to have. Now, a lot of organizations in the Middle East can be quite tough. Other organizations can create great cultures by being quite easygoing about performance with people. Now, it may well be that one of the ways in which to be able to deal with difficult situations is to have the right HR system in place in the first place. So in other words, is there a system of performance appraisal? Are there individual performance objectives for an employee? If there are, then that makes it easier to have difficult conversations, because you can actually turn to employees and say, well, look, we're going to give you every opportunity, every chance to improve your performance, and we're going to help you with that. So Jack Welch, who's quite famous for a very tough performance management system that used to be called Up or Out, he used to say that the worst cruelty is not to be honest with people about their performance. He used to say that you need candor in the workplace if you're going to be successful. So in other words, if people aren't performing well, they have to know, and they have to be told what they have to do to put that right. Even if they take that personally, they need to be allowed to go away, reflect upon that, and be given the support they need. Now, most leaders don't necessarily have a chance to create the HR rules and practices in their organization. But the best organizations work really hard to coach and support employees who are having performance problems. But they also point out to employees when it might be time to leave. So I hope that's helpful. Now, I think that's definitely now all we've got time for. I hope you found today's webinar enjoyable, whether you're listening live or will be listening to this as a pre-recorded podcast. I hope you have a lot of success with using these leadership styles. And don't forget, if you want to know more about these 6 leadership styles, you can just drop me a line and you can go back through these PowerPoint slides to read more. So take care, and until the next time, goodbye. Oh my